Hello, everybody. Welcome to our third class in the Heart Smart program. For those of you that are new to this program, my name is John Vredenberg. I am a registered dietitian and diabetes educator in employee wellness. I want to thank you for tuning into today's class, which often has a lot of questions around it when we look at issues around how we eat. It tends to be pretty confusing the more we talk about it. And I found this slide that I always like to put at the beginning of some of these nutrition talks to kind of let people know that you're not alone when we look at how difficult it can be to determine how to eat healthfully. There was a survey done several years ago by the International Food Information Council, and they looked at what people perceive to be harder, learning how to eat healthy or doing their taxes. And more people actually said it's more difficult to figure out how to eat healthy than doing your taxes. And I'm here to hopefully clear up some of that confusion. So hopefully everybody can hear me. If you want to just type any concerns or questions you have in the chat, I'll try to get those to you as quickly as possible. We're going to record each of these sessions like we have done throughout, and I'll share information at the end about how to access the information in terms of all the slides and all the material that we have coming your way. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off, get out of the way, and talk about what we want to cover today. So when we look at areas of nutrition and weight control, when it relates to heart disease, there's only a few key factors that you need to take home and understand when we're trying to make evidence-based decisions with regards to reducing our risk for heart disease. But I also want to let everybody know that nutrition, in order to be effective, is very individualized. So each of you that are on this class today may have a different goal in terms of your nutrition based on your past medical history. So it's always good to talk with a registered dietitian in terms of how nutrition can improve your current program, because a lot of it's going to be dependent on any other underlying conditions, whether it be diabetes, high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol. Those are the types of things we're talking to someone to navigate an individualized path is the way to go. So again, that's a service that we provide to our employees, whether you're based here in Jacksonville or in Gainesville. We can make arrangements so you can talk to somebody one-on-one and get some of your nutrition questions answered. But before we kind of dive into today's talk, I wanted to just follow up on last week's talk. So we talked a lot, you talked a lot with Karan about changing habits. I wanted to just kind of throw out there, what did you notice about some of these habits? And for those habits, if you're trying to change, just ask yourself, what purpose are they serving? And one of the things I think is helpful to understand that is also a point made in the book that was talked about, Atomic Habits, and that is the role that environment plays in shaping our behavior. So if you're somebody who are trying to eat better, well, what type of environment are you in? Do you have a lot of processed snack foods front and center? Are you passing by a donut shop every way on your way to work? Look at the environment and look at how it can influence some of your behaviors. Are you trying to be more active? Then try packing a gym bag before you get ready for work each day, so you have that environment conducive to whatever habit you are trying to modify. And that's the key thing to remember when we look at these habits. There's usually a reason we do them. So in order to help change some of those habits, take a look at the environment you find yourself in and go a long way at having some good success. So in terms of overall teaching points today, these are the four things that I want everyone to leave here with today. First, I want you to just understand a little bit about the role that different nutrients play in our food, whether it's carbs, fats, proteins. Understand a little bit about what they do for our bodies, kind of helps you understand where to prioritize your own nutritional needs when we look at dietary changes. We're also going to look at what the research shows about types of dietary patterns and their impact on our rates for heart disease, whether it's a Mediterranean diet, a low-carb diet, a ketogenic diet. There is a lot of evidence that points to certain dietary patterns and their role at lowering our risk for heart disease. I'm going to also give you one method for estimating your calorie needs. I think it's important when we talk about nutrition and weight control, at least have a good yardstick for estimating what you may need for calories each day and what are some of the limitations of these estimations. And then lastly, really looking at what the evidence shows for weight management. So obviously with this class, we want to talk about lowering overall rates of heart disease specific to weight. So we're going to look at some research studies that have looked at the types of diets and how they impact weight loss in terms of overall long-term success. Now, I'll throw a quiz out here for you. So I've got about 4 multiple choice / true false questions out there. And you don't have to type your answers in the chat if you want to just kind of answer to yourself. I'd like to know, of these macronutrients, which is just a broad term for the big nutrients in the foods that we eat, which of these do you think provides the greatest number of calories per serving? So we put a 1 gram serving. So if you ever read the nutrition labels, you see carbs, fats, and protein, and sometimes even alcohol listed in terms of grams. Which of those 4 provides the most calories? See some of you chiming in with some answers there, so that's good. The correct answer is fat. So when we look at number of calories per gram, fat has 9 calories per gram. You can impress your friends with that knowledge at your next dinner party. Carbs and protein come in at 4 calories per gram, and alcohol is right there in the middle at 7 calories per gram. So again, when we're looking at weight management, that's one nutrient I like to key in on, although it is important to include heart-healthy fats and a nutrition plan to lower our risk for heart disease. It's also important to not overlook the fact that if we're not careful with the quantities of these types of nutrients or this type of nutrient, we can easily have too many calories overall. All right, true or false? Apple cider vinegar is an effective weight loss aid. Apple cider vinegar. I've seen it responsive of claims to do everything from improve blood pressure, improve blood sugar, control recycling, save the rainforest. When people seem to attribute everything to apple cider vinegar, but the answer here is actually false. Now, there are a lot of very small studies that have been done on apple cider vinegar showing, if combined with a lower calorie diet, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, like 2 tablespoons a day, seem to be correlated with a slightly greater amount of weight loss, 3 to 4 pounds. But again, the research is equivocal, meaning that's kind of all over the place. We really don't know what to think with apple cider vinegar. I will tell you this, it is safe, but it is not something that you want to be drinking straight because it's very acidic, of course, and it could do a lot to irritate your throat and perhaps even wear away at your teeth enamel. So if this is something that you want to try to integrate into your diet, I would suggest one of 2 things. Include it as part of your salads as an oil and vinegar mixture, or if you want to give it a try, mixing it with 8 ounces of water would be the only way in which to. But again, overall, the research doesn't really point to it being as effective for weight management than just lower calorie diets overall. On that token, certain foods such as grapefruit and celery help the body burn fat. This is a claim that I see out there quite often. And if you want to chime in the answer, go ahead, give you a second here. But the answer here is false. Now, the premise here is that since grapefruit and celery are so high in fiber and the body doesn't completely digest fiber and the digestion process costs calories, that therefore these are negative calorie foods. But that's not true at all. They do have some calories, grapefruit a lot more than celery, but they don't do anything magical to make the body burn fat. The only way that the body is going to burn fat is if there is a calorie deficit. The calorie deficit can come from consuming less calories than you burn or increasing overall levels of physical activity. There isn't a simple food that's going to do that for you. And last one, high fructose corn syrup is more fattening than regular cane sugar. True or false? That is false. So if we look at them from a biochemical standpoint, they're basically both fructose and glucose. They're equivalent of each part. High fructose corn syrup has slightly more fructose than glucose. Cane sugar is pretty much 50-50. But overall, they both provide the same amount of calories per unit of measurement. They both need to be reduced in our diets, and one isn't really less healthy than the other. So the message here is, in terms of healthful eating, these are both additives that we should be minimizing. So whether it's cane sugar or high fructose corn syrup, doesn't matter. They both provide empty calories to the diet. So that's kind of a taste of where we are. A lot of us look at these answers and say, well, gosh, I thought it was that high fructose corn syrup was evil and that apple cider vinegar would help me lose weight. But it's really not true. There's a lot of confusion that still exists out there, because oftentimes what people will do is take one kernel of truth, like say those limited studies about apple cider vinegar, and try to draw broad conclusions from them. And nowhere do you see that more frequently than in the diet industry. So several years ago, I think it was 2016, the Journal of the American Medical Association looked at some of the more popular diet programs out there. So on your screen, you see various diets mentioned: Atkins, Volumetrics, Ornish, Zone, Weight Watchers, Rosemary Conley, Jenny Craig. And for for this particular article, they tried to categorize it in terms of what type it was. Yes, in the chat, there is a point made: the Zone diet isn't really low carb, but I think they were just trying to find a category to put it in. But don't get too befuddled by the type that's listed in this particular graphic here. But what you see is, compared to no diet at all, a lower carb approach compared to a volumetrics approach, compared to the Zone, compared to Weight Watchers, compared to Rosemary Conley, which is actually she's a very popular British fitness and diet so-called expert, and then the Jenny Craig program. You see various amounts of success with amount of weight loss over a 6-month period. But after that, something very interesting happens: is at a year, compared to no diet at all, here's where weight loss was. So pretty much equivalent across the board. So the message here is that no matter what approach you follow, if you modify your eating practices from where they are now, chances are you're going to see some weight loss, because all of these programs that are listed are negative calorie programs, meaning they're designed to create a calorie deficit. So you have lower calories in Ornish, you have lower calories in Volumetrics, you have lower calorie in Weight Watchers, Zones, so on and so forth. So they're all creating an energy deficit, and they all produce the same amount of weight loss at a year. So really, it's about finding what's the right approach for you that's going to work. And my take-home message, a lot of times when we look at nutrition approaches for weight management, it's like, look, find the approach that's going to help you reach your goals and enable you to still like your life. There's so many ways which we can lose weight. There's no need to follow some arbitrary, rigid list of food choices when in fact it's just going to make you miserable. And that's why many diets fail, because we attach ourselves to very rigid guidelines and realize, gosh, this is no way to live. And we end up back to food choices that are going to be far on the other side. I've come up with a definition of healthy eating that I think really clarifies that point. And that is, when we look at healthy eating, it's not black and white. I try to avoid lists of good foods and bad foods. It's really about the pattern of food selections. What is your pattern of food selections? And is it giving your body the best balance of available nutrients? Not just improve and maintain your physical well-being, but for your mental well-being too. Sometimes we just want a donut. We can incorporate that single donut into a well-balanced eating pattern. If we're having it every day and we're trying to lose weight, well, then we need to examine it. But it's not black and white. It's the pattern of those food selections that we look at. And again, to look to maintain or improve physical and mental well-being. Now, if we consider why we eat the foods we eat, a lot of it's based on where we come from. Our family has a great influence on what we eat. Our culture has a big influence on what we eat. But all those factors that you see listed on your screen there's one factor time and time again that's going to dictate why people eat what they eat day in and day out. And I want to see who can actually come up with that reason. I'll give you a second to think about it. They're all relevant. They all are reasons why we eat. I'm not going to tell you you're incorrect if you feel that you don't eat for any one of those reasons, because it's there. That is very popular. the number one answer that comes time and time again, how many times we want to eat something? Yeah, it does involve hunger. We might be bored. We might be stressed out. We might have other people around us who are eating. The food is there. It was given to us. It's free. It's a special occasion. It's mealtime. But time and time again, the reason you are making the food choices you make each and every day is because you like how it tastes. And again, we're looking long range here. The reason we're looking long range because we want to make sure we're attaching ourselves to eating habits that are sustainable. And if you don't like the flavor of it, yeah, sure, you could suck it up for 3 months or 6 months, but eventually you're going to deviate away from it. So again, it's about exploring flavors of foods and then understanding how to make those flavorful foods part of your regular meal plan that can still help you meet your goals. And that's where understanding about nutrition is very helpful because you can see how different nutrients can impact how we feel. Now, a lot of people have information on what we should eat. I mean, people like myself and dietitians, we make a career out of advising people about nutrition choices. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the MyPlate. I know we've all heard of the dietary guidelines, and they speak broadly to huge populations about limiting added sugars, reducing salt intake. But really, what you should eat is what's going to make you happy and still help you meet your health goals. And that's where talking with somebody on an individual basis can help you find that middle ground. Because as I said before, we can look at a wide range and a wide number of approaches to healthy eating for weight loss. And all 36 of you that are on this call right now could have 36 different approaches to lose weight and 36 correct approaches to lose weight. But we want to make sure we're finding one that's sustainable. So if we look at what is found in the foods that we eat and understand a little bit more about the nutrients, I think that helps with some of your decision making. First, we eat food obviously because it tastes good, but we also need it for energy. And when we look at the nutrients we find in food, here are their two other main functions. So besides providing us energy, they're also providing structure to the cells, and they're also helping regulate body processes such as blood pressure and blood sugar and fluid volume that we have within our body. So these are the main functions of the nutrients that we get in all of the foods and drinks that we consume throughout our day. I try to group them up in two big categories. One I would call energy nutrients, and these are foods that contain calories. So energy, calories, they're pretty much synonymous. So your carbohydrates, your protein, your fat, those provide calories, those provide us energy. Carbohydrates help us maintain focus, help our brain get the fuel that it needs. Protein helps maintain and build lean muscle mass. And fat actually helps transport fat-soluble nutrients into our cells. So there's a reason behind all of these different energy nutrients. On the other side, we look at non-energy nutrients, still vital to life. Vitamins and minerals provide the structural framework of our body, play a key role in a lot of body processes, but they do not provide energy. So you can't take a multivitamin or vitamin supplement and expect to get energy from it because it doesn't have calories. And then, of course, water is another very important nutrient because obviously we can't live without it, but it also does not provide any calories. And when we look at nutrients and you look at everyone has a recommendation, say, for a healthy diet, it needs to be 50% carbs and 30% fat and 20% protein. That's a healthy diet. Well, the truth is, there really isn't an ideal ratio of these macronutrients. People can attain their health goals on any wide ranges of macronutrients, whether it's 40% fat and 30% carb, and the remainder coming from protein. What we want to look at is we want to get out of the mindset that there's a specific macronutrient ratio that we need to try to strive for each day, and instead look at the choices within each of those broad categories, whether the carbohydrate-based foods or protein-based foods or fat-based foods, and try to choose those that are the most minimally processed, meaning less refined carbohydrates, less added sugars, less added fats that are added through our food packaging processes. If we can find food choices that fit that bill, it doesn't really matter what, what type of ratio we attain. Now, again, how it needs to be individualized. Yes, certain individuals who have a history of diabetes, they may need to be a little bit more mindful of the carbohydrate quantity in their food choices. But again, by and large, there's no ideal ratio of macronutrients that's going to suit the entire population. It's all about finding the right approach for you that, again, you can sustain. One of the best tools I've found out there to kind of teach general nutrition habits to a large group is the Harvard version of the MyPlate. So this is slightly different than the USDA version that I had on that earlier slide, because it's actually giving you examples of choices within each of those key groups in terms of protein foods, in terms of whole grains, in terms of vegetables, as well as the beverages to choose at mealtime. And then also the importance of including healthy fats and oils like olive and canola oil as part of your meal patterns. This, I think, is a good visual description of what to choose in it, but it has limitations because, again, a lot of people look at this and find that, oh, well, I can't really have more than 2 servings of milk each day, or I shouldn't eat any red meat at all. Remember, nutrition is not black and white. We can still include these foods. We just have to perhaps limit their portions if we're looking at overall health and well-being. And if we take this information and put it into the lens of reducing our risk for heart disease, some interesting food trends start to occur. So there was a study done that looked at dietary food choices and its role in cardiovascular health and well-being, meaning what type of food choices were most correlated with higher rates of heart disease and lower rates of heart disease. And they put them into a pretty good diagram that basically makes it pretty clear that, okay, more of these foods are beneficial to the heart, more of those other foods are harmful to the heart. So you can see at the very top, maybe nothing too surprising, that yes, if you eat fruits and nuts and fish and vegetables and vegetable oils and whole grains and beans and yogurt, you're going to have perhaps improvements in cardiovascular health. But what was surprising is that even though things like white bread and white rice and regular pasta are low in fat, and they were traditionally hailed as very healthy food choices back in the low-fat craze of the 90s and the early 2000s, we found that those food trends that are highly correlated with those refined grains actually have higher rates of heart disease. So that's where you see those refined grains on the other side of the spectrum, in addition to things that may not be surprising, like sugars and higher salt food and trans fat, which is actually no longer in our food supply. Where it gets a little less clear is that middle ground. So you see in the middle of that spectrum, you got cheese, you got butter, you got eggs, you got chicken, you got regular red meat, so your steaks and such. Those really don't seem to move the needle one way or the other, meaning that there's not a direct correlation between higher rates of heart disease and cheese intake or butter intake. But the point of clarification here is that doesn't make it a healthy food choice. It just means that there's not enough evidence to say dietary patterns that are rich in that particular food choice increase the rates for heart disease. So the other interesting thing about this particular study is that there was really little evidence to show any connection between whether or not a food is organic, whether or not it's grass-fed, whether or not it's farmed or wild, or whether or not it's a non-GMO. Didn't really seem to correlate anywhere close to rates of heart disease. So again, focusing on the big picture, looking at total calories first and foremost seems to be a logical first step for many of us. Now, there were some other research studies that have been done. So for those of you that have been working in healthcare for a while, you may have heard of the Nurses Health Study, which is one of the largest aggregate studies. Over 280,000 nurses started back in the 70s, looked at the correlation between certain food choices and rates of weight gain. So what you see in this little chart on the screen is that for every increase in servings of things like potato chips, potatoes, processed meat, so your sausages and things along those lines, unprocessed red meats, that's your steak, your butter, your sweets and desserts, your refined grains, those were correlated with weight gain. Whereas on the other side, cheese, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, fruits, yogurt were correlated with weight loss over the study period. And then, of course, at the bottom, you see that your sugar sweetened beverages and your 100% fruit juices correlated with weight gain. Everything else seemed to really have marginal impact. Even diet soda didn't really seem to be correlated much with any type of weight change. So again, doesn't mean it's a cause. It's just an interesting correlation. I try not to get too wrapped up in some of these correlations because, you can find all sorts of correlations. I bet you didn't know that there's a direct correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. Doesn't mean ice cream causes shark attacks. But again, when we look at the literature, we want to make sure we're looking at some of our food choices and say, oh, well, you know what? I do see potato chips and French fried potatoes being at the top of that chart there. How often am I including those into my meal plan? And is it something that I could maybe remove and place with something a little bit healthier, a little bit lower in calorie, and start from there? Now, if we look at, again, getting back to the matter at hand of trying to simplify weight control, understanding the environment that we're in right now, you can see, okay, this is why we're seeing higher rates of obesity. We, of course, have more screen time. Many neighborhoods, there are much fewer walking and biking routes. We have more drive-through windows. There's less overall movement in our society. How many of you have texted somebody that's been in the next room or called somebody that's down the hall from your office? So these little bouts of physical activity that we're finding less and less in our routine cause a lot of that energy imbalance. On the other side, when we see more food marketing, there's $14 billion. Estimates are all over the place. So it's about $14 billion spent on advertising each year. And 80% of that amount is directed towards fast food, sugary drinks, and candy. So we see more marketing. We're more inclined to buy something, more sugar sweetened beverages. We're doing more dining out. We have more palatable foods. When we have foods that are highly palatable and very rich in added sugar and added fats, that tends to send our brain into hyperdrive, and we just don't know to put our fork down, and we're going to be inclined to eat the entire bag. So this is how potato chips can end up being such a problem in terms of weight gain, because we want to continue to take more and more and more of them in, because it does make us feel good, at least for a moment. So that's where we are in terms of overall energy balance. But I think it's important to make sure everybody understands your calorie needs. So again, when it comes to weight loss, we still look at total calories. But in terms of sustainable weight loss, we don't want you counting calories every day, if that makes any sense. Have a good understanding of what you need for energy each day, but don't micromanage it to the point where you're counting every single calorie, because after a few weeks or a few months, it's going to get tired very quickly, and you're going to find yourself really not learning much at all. Try to instead focus on natural hunger cues, respond to them, build your plate with healthy food choices, and the rest will take care of itself. I do, though, think it is important to at least have a ballpark understanding of, okay, well, what are my daily calorie needs? And they're estimates, but one of the websites that I'm going to refer you to, and again, everyone on this call or everyone that's registered for HeartSmart will get a copy of these slides, and you can see the web address there. And I'll show you what it'll look like here in the next slide. You have ways that you can estimate your calorie needs, and it's largely based on your age and your level of activity. But the calories that we burn each and every day are coming from three key areas. Most of it is just to keep us alive, keep our body temperature at 98.6, keep our lungs working, our heart working, every organ that we have burning energy, our brain functioning. That's about 50 to 70% of our daily energy expenditure. The other, say 20 to 35%, that's coming from physical activity. That can vary considerably. If you're minimally active, your percentage obviously is going to be much lower. If you're very active, you're doing 45 to 60 minutes of physical activity each day, your percentage, of course, is going to be higher. But there's also a very small portion of our daily energy expenditure that is directed towards the food we consume. So the thermic effect of food. So foods that are rich in protein, tend to cost a little bit more to digest and metabolize than foods that are rich in added fat. So this might be some of the explanation behind the success of some of those higher protein weight loss programs, because there is a higher thermic effect. But overall, it's still a very small part of daily energy expenditure. So again, don't take that kernel of truth and say, oh, you know what, I just need to be protein, because it's not quite that simple. So I did some homework there. I did my little information there. I can share this freely. I think it's not breaking HIPAA if they're your own numbers, right? So I just was curious, okay, well, what kind of calorie calculation is this going to give me? There's a lot of prediction equations that are out there. They're usually within 300 or 400 calories of each other. So again, it's not an exact science, but I typed in my information and I put my level of activity. And according to this calculator, it put me at 2,500 calories. Now, is that going to be my calorie prescription? No, this is just an estimate of how many calories I would need each day to maintain my weight. If I'm trying to lose weight, I would need to consume under that amount. And the thing about this is that activity, people judge their intensity of activities very differently, as you can see on the screen there. Depending on how active I am, I could be burning anywhere from 2,050 calories each day to 2,900 calories each day. So again, look at this website, type in your information, use it just as it is. It's just a ballpark figure for you to maintain your current weight. If we're looking to lose weight, it's quite logical to maybe reduce that number by even 500 to 1,000 calories each day, or increasing your energy expenditure by the same amount. So again, just it's a helpful tool to just understand a little bit more about what our calorie needs are, because it also puts some perspective on some of your food choices. Because a lot of times you may look at calories and say, oh my gosh, this has 400 calories. And they're like, well, how many calories do you think you need each day? Like, I have no idea. So now you can have some relevance when we look at some of these calorie choices that we're making. So when we look at, again, getting back to simplifying nutrition and weight control, it's often overlooked that just how powerful a 10% weight loss can be. With just a 10% weight reduction, even if it still means you're above your goal weight or your target weight or a weight that your doctor once threw out there that said you should weigh, we see significant improvements in blood pressure. We see much lower risk for diabetes. We also see lower incidences and problems with osteoarthritis, because there's less strain on the knees. We see all sorts of improvements, and this improvement still occurs, as I said, even if you're just still overweight at that weight loss. And the other thing to keep in mind, and this is going to be an important lesson when we get to the very end, is that physical fitness makes you healthier at any weight. So even if you're overweight and you're physically active, that is helping give your heart the strength it needs. And it's going to make the difference when we look at improving quality of life and lowering our risk for heart disease. So oftentimes when we look at weight loss overall, we've all maybe asked somebody that had lost a lot of weight, hey, what was your secret? Or you lost a lot of weight, what did you do? And they'll give you, their little snippet, their little anecdote of what worked for them. But there's a national registry. This registry is basically a collection of 10,000 people across the country who have lost a significant amount of weight and have kept it off. Because remember, we saw in that first study at the Journal of the American Medical Association, no matter what type of diet approach you follow, you're going to lose weight. But if you can keep it off, that's the way to go. And the people that are able to keep it off do certain habits on a consistent basis. So 98% of them report modifying their food choices in some way. That makes sense. Nutrition is a huge part of weight control. That's why we're here today. 94% increased physical activity. Most of them ate breakfast each day. Most of them weigh themselves once a week. I think when we look at taking measurements of something, that's a real, it's a big hallmark of management. Something that gets measured gets managed. So looking at your weight on a weekly basis, not obsessing over it, not doing it on a daily basis, but looking at your trends week over week and asking yourself, okay, well, what has changed recently? So, well, maybe I'm less active or maybe I'm dining out more. But again, these are habits that have shown to correlate with, keeping the weight off. The other thing you'll notice that 62% watch less than 10 hours of TV per week. And you might be saying, well, who watches 10 hours of TV per week? Well, that's what the average American does. And it's probably increased even more since the pandemic. Luckily, we're working our way through that. Things are opening back up. We're getting more outdoor. We're getting more engaged in group activities. So as that number continues to go down, hopefully our success at keeping the weight off will increase too. And then on average, 90% of them are getting about 60 minutes of activity each day. So that's a big number, because if we look at what the standard recommendation is for heart health, it's 150 minutes per week. Okay, but 1 hour per day, that's a lot higher than just 150 minutes per week. So it's more than double that amount. So again, these are some of the habits that people are doing that are losing weight and keeping it off. And it's all about, okay, well, which of those do you think you could do? And building those habits and building your environment around those types of starting points. And if it's still confusing, this is where talking to a dietitian can be particularly beneficial. And a lot of the things that I talk about when I do nutrition counseling always involves looking at what that person's trigger foods are. Because we all have trigger foods. We all have those foods that we just crave when we're stressed, or if they're in the house, chances are we can finish the entire bag. Mine sometimes is Cheez-Its, so it's easy to wipe out an entire box if you're not careful. So some of the effective ways to deal with it is just keeping it out of the house in general. Other things that could be particularly helpful for you is developing a weekly menu to help you with your shopping. We see a direct correlation between weight loss and dining out, meaning that the less often you are dining out, the easier it's going to be to lose weight. The average, again, averages can be deceiving, but the average restaurant meal these days is about 900 calories. 900 calories, and that doesn't count any appetizers or desserts. So that's just for the entree and side items itself. So 900 calories, that's a big chunk of change. So if we can remove a lot of that impulsive restaurant eating, and it starts by developing weekly menus, you can go a long way for weight loss success. And the other thing that's very helpful for many is getting social support. A lot of times if we're out with friends and family and they'll try to coerce us with, mom's homemade apple pie or your aunt's mac and cheese, and just letting people know, say, hey, look, I'm trying to make just a few nutrition changes to my diet to help us, help me lower my risk for heart disease. This is what I'm looking for from you. Usually you'll be pleasantly surprised at some of the support you can get by enlisting the help of others. And then another important thing is learning to differentiate hunger and craving. So hunger usually starts very slowly and gradually builds its way up. Cravings can happen almost immediately and are often tied to specific foods. So if you are craving one specific food choice, the good news is those cravings aren't going to last forever. So redirecting yourself, going for a walk, going outside, calling a friend, looking at it, diving into another project, that craving will likely pass. If you're still noticing it 30 minutes later or 40 minutes later, then that might be hunger. So hunger takes some time to ramp up, but differentiating the two, I think, is very helpful when we look at other nutrition strategies. I think from a meal planning standpoint, I often try to, have people look at, good sources of lean protein, which helps us maintain muscle mass, combining that with lots of fruits and vegetables at meals. That dietary pattern seems to help promote satiety, or that feeling of fullness, and knocking refined carbs out of the diet, trading all the white rice, white pasta, and white bread for more whole grain versions can also help control overeating. So you're reaching the end here. And again, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. But one of the things I think is also helpful is just having a clear understanding of where you are now. And the homework assignment that I have for each of you, and it's not going to be graded, but if you can think to email it to me, I'd appreciate it. You'll have my email because I'm I'm the one that sends you all these presentations there, but I'd like for you to keep a 3-day food record. Just start writing down everything you eat over a 3-day period. And again, this is more for your benefit than my benefit. You can begin to understand about some of your food choices tied to your mood, tied to the time of day, tied to where you are, and that helps increase awareness. Food records are often very helpful for those of you that have used MyFitnessPal and other food trackers, because they do create that awareness that sometimes we're missing when we're looking at our food choices. We just don't pay attention to what we're eating. We don't realize that, oh, you know what, I just had a whole box of wheat things. I probably don't need to be eating again. So those are some of the things that I think can be very helpful. I'm also going to be sharing with everyone on this call, or everyone that's registered, a copy of the Keep the Beat cookbook. So this is a 160-page cookbook. I'm going to send you an electronic version, and you can navigate through this. These are recipes that are built on some of the dietary patterns that we looked at in terms of rich in fruits and vegetables and whole grains and healthy fats that are correlated with lower rates of heart disease. And again, just sample whatever you feel comfortable with your family. And you're not asked to make every single item in that cookbook. But again, I think it's a helpful resource. That's something that's had a lot of favorable feedback from other classes. So I'm going to share this with you as well. So I don't see any questions coming in the chat right now. So hopefully everybody is still with me here. But just like before, we want everyone to just complete a simple test for attendance credit. And again, this is really regardless of where you are, even if you're in Gainesville and you don't need this class for any particular wellness points, we still want to track who's coming. So this is really just a real quick quiz in which to do that. You can take your smartphone out right now if you're not already on it and scan that code. It'll take you right to the quiz. You'll enter your information and answer the questions for the quiz questions that are up there, and that'll get you on your way. So I have run to the end of my time. I cover a lot of information with this particular talk, so I do tend to move very quickly through the material, but if you have any questions that are on your mind and you think of it 5 hours from now, feel free to shoot me an email. And if you want to talk to somebody about your personal nutrition goals, that's what I'm here for as well. So you can reach out to me directly, you can send me an email, and I'd be glad to set something up either in person or via Zoom to see where we can help you navigate your own individualized path towards healthy eating. So with that, I will end this session here and just remind everybody that we're going to have Rachel Carloni on with us next week, and she is going to be talking to you about medications. So there's a lot of different medications that are used to, whether we're looking at lowering cholesterol or improving blood pressure. She's going to share with you some important information about these medications, some tips on using them, as well as some discount programs that are available, especially for those of you that are on the Gator Care health insurance plan. She'll have some information as it relates to our formulary too. So with that, I'll be hanging out here in the chat if anyone has any questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the